See this? This the kingpin, alright? And he the man. You get the other dude's king, you got the game. And he trying to get your king too, so you got protected. Now the king, he move one space, any direction he damn choose, cause he's the king. Like this, alright? But he ain't got no hustle. But the rest of these motherfuckers on the team, they got his back. And they run so deep, he really ain't gotta do shit.
I like your uncle.
Yeah, like my uncle. And you see this? This the queen. She smart, she fierce. She move any way she want, as far as she want. And she is the go get shit done piece. Remind me of Stringer.
Alright now, before we even start this video, y'all, the meaning of the genre classified as a drama and what makes a good one needs to be defined, because otherwise it's going to be impossible for y'all to understand the context of this video without knowing what the genre really is. Now, the genre drama is defined as a genre that relies mostly on the emotional and relational development of realistic characters, essentially meaning that in order for a drama to work, the audience needs to have some sort of an emotional connection with the show's characters, because if they don't, many character-centralized storylines are simply just going to fall flat, which is often a problem with many small-cast TV shows, as if the audience isn't able to get attached to the main 3 or 4 characters, they're highly unlikely to enjoy the show, seeming as though nearly every minute of the show is going to evolve around these sets of characters. However, ensemble dramas rarely have this problem, which is why they're so popular, as when you have a cast so big, it's very unusual that an audience member struggles to have an emotional connection with at least one of those characters. Take, for example, The Wire, which I often hear complaints about when it comes to its 5th season, and its so-called boring characters in the newsroom, which to an extent I agree with. However, The Wire's cast is so big that a poorly written set of, say, 5 to 6 characters who only ever appear on screen for maybe 6 to 7 minutes an episode isn't going to ruin the show, as all one needs to do is simply just weed on through a 2 or 3 minute scene involving a character they don't like before a character they do reappears on screen. And in the case of The Wire, many a times, the characters most people do like, such as Jimmy McNulty, ultimately end up intertwining and interacting with the characters people don't like, such as Scott Templeton, ultimately enhancing the watchability of the many prior boring scenes he was solo in. And the same applies for Game of Thrones, as similar to The Wire, Game of Thrones cast is so big that you're rarely ever stuck with the character you don't like for a long period of time, as scenes are constantly changing and cutting between a whole cast of completely different characters, who the audience is more than likely able to find an emotional attachment to at least one, if not several other characters. Now, I know you're all probably wondering how any of this relates to the clip I decided to show at the start of the video, which is my main argument as to why ensemble dramas are typically more likely to succeed than any other form of drama, and that is because of something I like to call the game. Now, what do I mean by this? Ensemble dramas, especially in the case of The Wire, Game of Thrones, and Succession, are all shows that are set up in a way that they could be seen as a large game, like chess, where at the beginning of the show, you have certified kings, such as Robert Baratheon, Avon Barksdale, and Logan Roy. And over the course of the show, we spend time with characters in the role of a pawn, bishop, or queen, whose ultimate goal is to overthrow that king and take all of the power for themselves. However, as simple as this may seem, these 3 shows in particular do a very good job of something I like to call hiding the obvious, which is where the creators of each show, take for example Game of Thrones, rarely make it clear as to what its characters' true wants and desires are, such as Varys, who when the show was still great, never revealed to anybody his true intentions, and everything we see him do was all left to personal interpretation, such as the time where we found out in season 1 that Varys was actually helping Daenerys seemingly overthrow the current king. And what was so interesting is that not only did we all have no idea as to how and why he was doing this, but up until the end of season 1, was all under the impression that Varys would just be nothing more than a small obstacle in a long road for the character of Ned Stark to overcome. However, once Ned Stark was killed, the ultimate subversion of expectations, we all finally realized that no character was ever truly safe, and therefore when it came to the Game of Thrones, anybody could win.
Over and over, till we forget that it's a lie. But what do we have left once we abandon the lie? Chaos. A gaping pit waiting to swallow us all. Chaos isn't a pit. Chaos is a ladder.
Now, in comparison to The Wire and Succession, I'm sure a lot of you were under the impression that Kendall Roy was going to be the one to take over his father's company, and all of the other lesser characters were simply just small obstacles for our main protagonist to overcome. However, as the course of the show went on, similar to Game of Thrones, you slowly realized this not to be the case, and any character you root for, no matter how small or how big, has an equally as good a chance at winning the game. And what this also does is make every small moment count. Now, what do I mean by this? Let's say you're watching a scene and the character does something that at the time you deem to be insignificant in the grand scheme of things, such as Prop Joe cutting a deal with Stringer after D'Angelo's funeral, which at the time could be interpreted as Prop Joe simply wanting more territory in turn for product. Nothing more, nothing less. However, as the show unfolds, we eventually learn that the reason Prop Joe really did this was an attempt to cause discord between Stringer and Avon, which in turn will raise Joe's stock and push him further towards his ultimate goal of becoming the king of Baltimore. And the fact that we rarely, if ever, have any private scenes with characters like Joe or Slim make every move they make all the more interesting, as we rarely ever know why they're doing what they're doing until it's done. And this method of storytelling does also apply to many shows outside of these three, such as Better Call Saul, who rarely ever tells you in the moment why a character is doing what they're doing, and only will you ever find out why later down the line. For example, Gus hiring Mike to act as a PI in order to get Lalo arrested, which ultimately culminated in Lalo retreating back to Mexico, where the Sicarios Gus hired can take him out. A small and seemingly insignificant moment, which if you take the time to carry on watching, usually results in a rewarding payoff. And for those who at the time didn't want to wait for the following week to find out why a character did something, tended to start researching into the show, trying to find out why a character made the play they made, and what might happen next because of it. And 9 times out of 10, the majority of the predictions that they made were ultimately wrong, as what people tend to do is make predictions based off what they want to see play out on screen. Take, for example, the Battle of Blackwater Bay. A fan of Stannis is more than likely going to predict that Stannis takes over King's Landing, puts Joffrey's head on a spike, and all is happily ever after, as because of the reputation that Joffrey has built for himself, this is what audience wanted to see play out. And when you factor into account that Stannis' army was several times larger than that of Joffrey's, the idea that Stannis wins this battle was far from unrealistic. However, a small and seemingly insignificant scene a few episodes earlier between Tyrion and the Pyromancer, one that at the time may have seemed like nothing, is replaced back into effect, and is ultimately the reason why Stannis ends up losing the Battle of Blackwater. And what makes this all the more interesting is that a character like, say, Tyrion, who in this instance doesn't have access to even a third of the power that Stannis possesses, needs to use his wits in order to get the upper hand, which more often than not leads to a lot of off-screen plotting and a subversion of expectations, as the creators of the show are more than likely to have spent hours upon hours attempting to create a logical reason as to how the lesser can defeat the more. And this doesn't even apply to just film and TV, as take for example an MMA fight. When a viewer is unable to predict the outcome of a fight, said match becomes all the more interesting. And when you factor into account the fact that the entire division of the two fighters you just watched is also stacked, watching said division becomes all the more interesting, as the fighters you're personally rooting for have just as good a chance as any at becoming the new king of their division, no matter how strong or popular the other fighters are. Now, another point I want to mention when it comes to who the audience roots for is something labeled as conflicting loyalties. And this is essentially where an audience member has an emotional attachment to two characters who are on opposing sides. Take, for example, Davos and Tyrion. Many fans who want to see Davos succeed in helping Stannis take over King's Landing may also not want to see Tyrion killed. And what this does is enhance the eventual exchanges between these two characters and also removes the aspect of predictability. As when a creator either has two good guys or two bad guys going up against one another, neither the protagonist or antagonist of said story, the outcome of their battle is truly unpredictable, as no matter who wins or loses, the story is still able to progress without them. And for those who want to make the claim that this method of storytelling doesn't only apply to ensemble dramas, this is true, as one could argue that the supposed villain of a small cast story, take for example Gustavo Fring, could be seen as a lesser evil than the protagonist, causing an audience member to flock to their side. However, the problem with this is the fact that most small cast stories usually pitch you with a simple 1v1 scenario, and 90% of the time, especially shows that introduce a new antagonist each season, such as Dexter, have already roped you into siding with the protagonist no matter what, as however unjustifiable they may be, you've spent the majority of your time with them. And when a cast is so small, removing the main character and driver of the story more often than not is what causes the ending of a show. Let's take for example Breaking Bad. If Gus was to have defeated Walter in season 4, what conflict would we now be left with? And who would take Walter's place as the character who pushes the story forward? Nobody. And the audience knows this, which is why no matter how in danger and trapped Walter may seem, we all subconsciously know that he's gonna find some way to pull through, as the cast of characters isn't deep enough in the story to carry on without him. And this is why ensemble dramas are so great, because it doesn't have this problem. As the cast is so big, you can remove characters like Ned Stark and still be left with several characters who can still push the story forward, ultimately removing the aspect of predictability, as nobody you know is ever truly safe and anybody could win. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications. And I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.